Senator from Kentucky.
Shortly, we will be voting on the penny plan budget. This is a budget that cuts 1 penny out of every dollar. As we've gone through time and time again, we've seen that there's so much waste in government. From $700,000 spent studying Neil Armstrong's statement on the moon, did he say one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, or did he say one small step for a man? We spent $700,000 trying to discover whether Neil Armstrong said a man or just said man. Complete boondoggle, complete waste of money. But does it get better? No, because we give people more money. Now, some have come to the floor and said, well, but this is just an end-around attempt to cut military spending. We can't cut any military spending. Well, it's simply not true. The penny plan budget says nothing about cutting military spending. The penny plan budget says this: we cut 1% of the budgetary spending. Where it is cut in the budget is left up to the appropriation committees. It could be cut equally, or it could be cut more in some areas and less in other areas. You could cut some from military, you could cut zero from military. It is left up to the appropriators. Now, some would argue, well, it doesn't define. Well, that's the job of the appropriators, and then it's the job of the Congress or the Senate to vote up or down on it. But to those who argue that unlimited spending for the military is good for our national security, they might want to think about whether there's a possible problem in that China has $1 trillion worth of our debt. Let's say for some reason there was a conflict in the South China Sea and we were somehow involved militarily there. What if China were to say, we're going to dump your dollars? We're going to dump your treasury bills. Could they wreak havoc dumping $1 trillion? Yes. Would it hurt their assets? Yes, but it could be used as a weapon against the United States. Our insecurity is our enormous debt, $21 trillion. In some ways, the budget vote is symbolism, but the question is whether or not that symbolism will be who we are as a Republican Party, or whether that symbolism will be that we are simply the same as the Democrats, that simply we don't care about the debt. We don't care that the debt is the second, that interest on the debt is the second biggest item. After Defense Department, about $700 billion, the next biggest item is $300 billion in interest. What happens when interest rates rise? The Federal Reserve has artificially kept interest rates low. What about when interest rates go to 5%? Could that happen? Yes. Could it be precipitated by a foreign nation no longer buying our debt? Yes. If interest rates were to go to 5% currently, I don't know that we would manage our debt. That would probably be a doubling of our interest payment or more, $600 billion. If we do nothing and the Federal Reserve is able to keep our interest rates in the 2% range, interest rates still will be about the same as the Department of Defense within 10 years. Department of Defense about $700 billion. It'll grow probably to $800 some odd billion, but interest rates will be $761 billion within a decade. If that's not a threat to our national security, I don't know what is. But really what we have is a threat to our honor as public servants who make promises to voters. We came to power in Washington because we said President Obama spent too much and borrowed too much. And we said it over and over and over again until voters chose us. But what if when we become in power, we forget who we are? When Republicans are in the minority, they are the conservative party. The problem is that the Republicans become the majority, there is no conservative party. What I'm arguing for today is to cut 1 penny out of every dollar. There is waste from top to bottom in every department of government, including the military. Defense logistics, they build stuff. They have $800 million they say is missing. Defense spending or military spending in Afghanistan, $700 million of ammunition missing. Now, you think that might be a little bit worrisome, given all the different characters in the Afghan civil war. $700 million in ammunition cannot be accounted for. $28 million in uniforms cannot be accounted for. They built a $45 million gas station in Afghanistan, but it's for natural gas. First problem is they don't have cars in Afghanistan. Second problem is none of them run on natural gas. So how do we fix that problem? We bought them cars. We bought them cars that run on natural gas, and they still couldn't afford the gas, so we gave them credit cards. How moronic are we as a people to keep flushing money down a rat hole in Afghanistan? Nearly $50 billion. What I'm asking is that we cut 1%, 1 penny out of every dollar. Could we save some in military? Absolutely. Is this done to punish the military? No, it's to make us stronger as a country. Could the military suffer a 1% cut and actually become more efficient? Absolutely. It's not a question of whether our military budget is too big. It's a question, or too small. It's a question of whether or not our military mission is too large. We're at war in a half dozen countries or more. We have 6,000 troops in Africa, and I would suspect that there's not one person in 1,000 in America that knows who we're fighting or why we're fighting in Africa. But that's not really what this is about. It's about spending in every department of government. It's about whether or not 1 penny out of every dollar is being wasted. And people say, well, I'm against the waste. I'm against all the waste. I'm against the study on Japanese quail to see if they're more sexually promiscuous on cocaine. I'm against the Neil Armstrong study to study whether or not he said one man on the moon or just man on the moon. The thing is that you can't get rid of waste unless you actually reduce the top line spending, because nobody has any incentive to do it. When the sequester first came into place, even though people didn't like it, people throughout government began finding savings. You cannot get rid of waste in government if you keep giving people more money. The National Science Foundation has wasted millions and millions and millions of dollars over a 30-year history. William Proxmire first reported in the early 1970s. He said that one of their first studies was $50,000, back then that was more money than it is now, to study why men like women. Really? That's a good use of the taxpayer funds? This year we will spend $1 trillion we don't have. There'll be nearly $1 trillion deficit this year. That's what we complained about under President Obama, was big annual $1 trillion deficits. Are we going to be the party that actually is true to what we say we're for, that we're fiscally conservative? Can we not cut 1 penny out of every dollar? So I exhort my colleagues, think long and hard about this vote. Think what the people at home would want you to vote. You've gone home and you've said you're for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. The balanced budget amendment to the Constitution that virtually all of my Republican colleagues voted for says we will balance the budget in 5 years. Well, we're either honest and serious or we're not. So if you can vote for a balanced budget amendment that balances in 5 years, why won't you vote for a budget that balances in 5 years?
For unanimous consent request.
I'll finish in a few minutes. And it's a canard. It's a canard to say, oh, well, the cut is coming from military. The cut is a 1% cut. It's $3.2 trillion spent, and it's $32 billion that would be cut. Well, we send $30 billion to foreign countries that hate us every year. We spend $50 billion or nearly $50 billion in Afghanistan every year. If you were simply to look at the Department of Commerce, $14 billion, and the Department of Education, $70 billion, I think we could find $30 billion worth of that you'd never know was gone. But the bottom line is whether the debt is threatening our national security, whether it's threatening the security and the economic foundation of our country, and I think without question it is. This vote is a litmus test for conservatives. Are you a conservative? Do you think we could cut 1 penny out of every dollar? I think it is a conservative notion that we have long said we are for. Now it's time to step up to the plate and actually vote what you say you stand for. With that, I yield back my time and ask for the yeas and nays.